At the end of January, beginning of February, I took a trip. This was actually one of the first trips I had taken for a while. Just brief nutshell, I had moved back to San Francisco in 2019 from Southern California. So this vacation this little trip that I was going on here in 21 was actually the first time I was going to be leaving the Bay Area for actually leaving California, because I did do a couple road trips to Southern California. Anyway. What I'm getting at is that this vacation, this trip, was one, meant to be a getaway breather before my big announcement, which I promise I will tell in the next video if y'all haven't already figured it out. Not that hard to figure out. So again, way to get away. Two, I was originally planning to go to Washington, D.C. to watch the inauguration. We know how that turned out. And actually, I'm wrong. This was originally planned for the beginning of January. And then what happened is that my flights were canceled. And then my Airbnb was canceled, and that hit the nail in the coffin. So it was supposed to be a combination DC first time, New York first time inauguration trip. So, and again, I know I've already said this, but there's a reason why I'm telling you all these details, and it'll make so much more sense in the next video, I promise. But so not only, I've already said this 4 times, but this was supposed to be my way of hey, getting out, getting a breather before I get back and get to work, right? So I kept the New York portion of my trip. And those of you with any knowledge of Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. is one of my favorite cities in the world, actually. And I went, ironically enough, about a year after this for the first time, and I will absolutely talk about that because it absolutely pertains to the story. However, this was strictly New York, right? Because DC got canceled. Even if I was going to be stubborn and go, those of you that know DC knew that there was no way I was going to watch the inauguration if they decided to close things off to the public. So, flew to New York, and I left Peter's house to go directly to the airport. And actually, that was the morning of the inauguration, I remember. Because I was watching it as the plane was watching it up until the moment that I had Wi-Fi, right? As long as I had Wi-Fi, up until the moment the plane took off. And then so I do remember seeing the vice president being sworn in. I don't care how stupid it sounds. Y'all can laugh because I'm laughing at myself, honestly. But I'm sitting there crying with my mask on because we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and I've gotten on a plane, and the last thing I need to do is get COVID. And the flight attendant, she's like, oh, because she sees what I'm doing. And the only thing that I'm going to say is that the vice president began her career here in San Francisco as district attorney. Then became California Attorney General, and then went to the Senate. So regardless of how you feel about this person and their politics and etc., this was a name that I had grown up with. And in the capacity at that time, and in my mindset at that time, and the capacity at that time, the inauguration was historic, and I wanted to be there to see it. Didn't get a chance to do that. So, get on the plane to New York. 5 hours later, I land in the very, very, very cold city of New York. I remember my very first impression of New York City was, wow, it's going to take a little more than $50 in a suitcase to make it here. You're going to need to have something a little more than that. And the thing is, you might just freeze and die out here. You can't just pack up camp at a beach the way you can do in California. No, you'll die, and then the cockroaches will eat your body. That was my first impression. That, and it just felt like a lot of money. Just all those buildings, A lot of money. I'm gonna be honest, I was not too impressed by Central Park. Sorry. Have you seen Golden Gate? Here's the real tea. And there's a running joke between native San Franciscans and New Yorkers that New Yorkers come to San Franciscans go to New York, and they never come back, right? They fall in love with the other city. So I was a little worried that I was going to go to New York, fall in love, and then not want to go back to San Francisco. That was not the case. Yeah, not just the weather, but like New York just doesn't stop coming at you. It's so big. It's way too big. I'm sorry. I know it's a lot of people's favorite city. It's way too overwhelming. It's way too overwhelming. With that being said, I got to check out Columbia University. I've been to every Ivy League except for 3. I went to Stonewall. That was very, very important and high up on my list. And I think I did mention earlier that I had published my first book in July. And I'll have a copy to show you guys at some point. A Real San Francisco Story with Pets. And I took 3 copies of that book to go leave at strategic places in New York. Just something that I thought I would do. I gave one to a crystal seller. I think I left one at Marcus Garvey Park. And I think I left one at Columbia University. But anyway, I do want to talk about Stonewall. That is one of my New York experiences that I want to talk about, because I knew that Stonewall was a bar. I knew they served alcohol, but I guess I thought maybe it was also a restaurant, or maybe at least I could get a cup of coffee, because I really wanted to get something there, right? But it's just a bar and I don't drink. So I remember not going to the I should have just ordered a Shirley Temple, but whatever. I remember going out to the little spot. I think it's the Memorial, where they have like all those figurine seating. And I remember that's where I left a book, actually. I left a book at the Stonewall Memorial. That's what I did. And I left it in like one of the figurines' hands, if I remember correctly. The energy that I got at the Stonewall Memorial, and this will make sense in the next video, I promise, was like, it was very dynamic. I remember going and like wanting to sit there and kind of enjoy myself for a second. I was allowed to for like maybe a couple minutes, and then it was almost as though I could feel, I'm just gonna say it, I could just feel the ancestors, I could feel the transcestors, I could feel my all of the queer folks that had come before me and made it possible. And again, I know I keep saying this, but this will make a lot more sense. And it was basically giving this energy of like, you have work to do, enjoy your time, but don't sit on your haunches for too long. I don't know how else to describe it. That was the energy that I left Stonewall with. And yeah. So I stayed in New York, I don't know, for 4 or 5 days. I stayed in an apartment on the Upper East Side, and I remember my Airbnb host tried very, very hard to hook up with me. And I was so in love with Peter that, yeah, no, that was not going to happen. And I won't talk anything more about that, but it was interesting just talking about how the pandemic had affected New York compared to how the pandemic had affected San Francisco. That's all I'll say about that. And yeah, that was my visit to New York. I arrived back in San Francisco, California. And in the next video, I promise, I am going to jump right into the announcement that I made at the end of March and how that affected my April, my May, and my June, which, universe, don't hold your beer, please. But June was one of the worst months of my life in a year. That was one of the worst years of my entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll see you in the next video.